And welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Going for Two, presented by our dear friends at Home Field Apparel. Recording this here on a Thursday afternoon evening. I am your host, Matt Brown. I run the Extra Points newsletter for the D1 Ticker family. I'm joined here, as always, by Brian Fisher, my colleague in this enterprise. We're about halfway done with the season, which is exciting, but I don't want to talk about football games right now. Even though it is a prime football season, this is the obviously the big focus on the calendar. Brian, there's been just a shocking amount of basketball on the timeline, shocking amount of other sports being discussed here at this time of year. Why are we doing that?
Well, it's that time of year. We got basketball media days going on across the country. You know, the Big Ten just wrapped up theirs. ACC had their tip off, so it is kind of getting back into that mood for hoops. And in addition to all of that, you have everything that's kind of going on in the larger NCAA apparatus that I think is refocusing everybody in terms of, hey, these might be the changes coming towards not only the men's basketball tournament, but also the women's side. There's going to be a women's NIT run by there's already a women's NIT, but a women's NIT run by the NCAA coming as well. A lot of changes around, as you wrote, the NCAA baseball tournament potentially. So, the postseason structure for the NCAA, I guess, getting a little bit more press than it normally would this time of year, I guess.
Are you going to any of the basketball media days this year?
I have not. I am way too busy in order to get out to some of those, but hopefully we'll get out to some basketball games down the road. I know that's something I've talked with some of the folks at Fox about. But just at this point, it's all football and all the stuff that we're doing here at the D1 Ticker family as well. That is taking up quite a bit of my time as well. So finding the actual time to get out to a basketball game might be a little bit of a challenge right now. But you know what? After that national title game, you never know.
That's often how it is for outlets that are covering college athletics. You might go there's going to be a couple of big out of conference games in November and early December, but it's generally football. I felt kind of bad because I've gone to the Big Ten event several times, but this year it was in Minneapolis, and I get why they did that. Like that's a Minneapolis.
A lot of complaints about that too.
I get it because that is a gigantic women's basketball city, and that they haven't been hosting a whole lot of events, but even though it's not that far, it was just like, there's no way I could commit to spending any money and burning 2 days to come up to this thing. I know coaches will bitch about anything. Like they'll complain if the event's in their backyard because I don't actually have to talk to people. But yeah, I don't think I'm going to get to any either. Hopefully some more basketball games. Again, similar situation, right? We can all breathe. But at a lot of those media events, you're right. ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips was taking the lead on this, but he's not the only guy that's been talking about potentially expanding the NCAA men's and women's basketball tournament. And friends, if you have been listening to Going for Two, or if you've been reading Extra Points, this should not surprise you. Because Brian, we've been talking about this for like an entire year. This was part of the narrative when we were leaving the NCAA convention. We've talked about it, much earlier in the NCAA transformation process, transformation committee process. It's been brought up, I think, on Extra Points at least 2 months ago. And now the fact that more commissioners and more ADs and more administrators are willing to talk about it in public, I think should belay the point here that this is not just a message board hypothetical. I think we're getting to the point where there's going to be some real conversations. I will say, though, I don't know if you've been hearing differently. The tenor of those conversations, specifically around the men's basketball tournament, are different now than they were last winter or even over the summer. I am not getting nearly as much apocalyptic concern that the ASUNs and OVCs and the NACs of the world are going to be banished to outer darkness. My reading on this is we're probably talking about going from 68 to like 74 or 78 more than going to 90 or going to 68, but we're kicking all the pores out. Does that line up kind of with what you've been reading between the lines and hearing from folks?
Yeah, and I think you got to set it against the backdrop as we've mentioned quite a few times, just in terms of, all right, well who is actually in this large Division I right now? Or are we going to cut a few schools? Are we going to add some more schools? The pool of Division I schools could end up growing, down the road. So I think there's kind of a viewpoint of, hey, we got a lot more schools. Let's make sure that there's the requisite access, in terms of percentages to the NCAA tournament, really the biggest one around. And I think I do get the sense, like you were saying, that from those smaller leagues, they're a little bit more comforted about some of the conversations they're having. We'll know for sure for a lot of this stuff in the next couple of weeks. There's a board meeting at the end of the month where a lot of this stuff is not only expected to kind of get rolled out, but also voted on as well. There's some in-person meetings in Indianapolis as well. So we should have some more clarifying details. But I do get the sense that this is kind of a train that is almost a runaway at this point. That there's going to be some sort of expansion, and truthfully, we've kind of seen some of the breadcrumbs already coming out of the NCAA. I mean, you look at the women's tournament that they've moved to some changes on the models on that side. There are only going to be two regional sites next year and kind of going forward, but they're also doing kind of pods at the various sub regionals as well. So that's kind of where you can kind of play in instead of having that first four in Dayton every single year. Basically, some of those regional sites could end up hosting another set of four teams, and that being the first four at each of those four spots. So there's a lot of things that could be end up going on and going into this, but a lot of things I think that everybody's kind of coming around to saying, you know what, there's not much stopping this, and I think there's a little general resignation as well at some of these changes are going to end up happening.
I want to take maybe a quick step back in case you are listening to this and do not have the same kind of brain worms that I have and have been kind of following this really closely. When you talk about expanding the men's basketball tournament on Twitter, or even when you talk to a lot of basketball coaches, the feedback is usually overwhelmingly negative, right? The tournament is perfect as it is. Why are we messing with something that's not broken? I want to explain the argument as I understand it, both the stated argument and maybe the more cynical argument for why you reevaluate this. And then we could talk about what that might mean for some other postseason events here too. So as one commissioner was explaining it to me over the phone earlier this week, we moved to a 64 team model and then, kind of tweaked it to the, 64 ish where we have now in the early 80s. And that made sense. But Division I was like 260 teams then. And we've added dozens and dozens and dozens of schools. The growth has not been any more near proportional to the growth of Division I as a whole. In fact, you could argue that there's less championship access now for smaller leagues, given how the automatic bids are distributed than there was in earlier parts of the tournament. That has been true for other sports as well. And that's why, as our friend Matt Norlander at CBS reported, that the language to potentially bring this out would be to set a standard proportion for any postseason size. You can go up to 25% of the total teams playing that sport if you want to. So if you went up to 25 for men's basketball, I think we're looking at like 90, which is not something I have heard anybody that has any sort of push, sway within college sports, like really advocating for. But you can look at this as, maybe another small tweak as a way of improving equity, given what Division I actually looks like. If you make a small tweak here too, if you move from 68 to, if you add like 2 extra play-in games or something, you have like a Dayton play-in pod and a Vegas play-in pod or whatever. Is the NCAA making a gajillion more dollars? No, we don't really. I don't know if there's certainty about how much more Turner would pay for that or what that does for the tournament as a whole. But a relatively small tweak, especially if these games are midweek games. That's not going to, we're not talking about new revenue like college football playoff new revenue here, right? Like that's not the only reason to do it. Although everyone's always looking for a few nickels and quarters and dimes in the couch cushions as well. So that's part of this reason. Then you also have coaches who might prefer it because, hey, if it's easier to make the NCAA tournament, you might get some job security, or that's something else that you can pitch while you are recruiting. And if you're adding 4 or 6 or 8 more auto bid or at-large bids, probably at least 2 of them are going to go to somebody outside the Power Six, which may help with some kind of other equity issues there as well. This is just me personally. I don't know how you feel about this, Brian. I'm not a gigantic college basketball guy to begin with, but I don't feel like adding 2 more play-in rounds will irreparably damage the character of the NCAA tournament. I think the tournament still is going to be mostly the same. It'll just now feature more Florida State or more Penn State or more Wofford or so. I don't know, one of those. I think moving it to 90 or changing how the automatic bid structure set up, that would be a pretty significant change. What do you think?
Well, I think this is also a lot of a big distraction point by the fact that we have not heard much about the revenue changes that could end up becoming a part of this NCAA tournament structure, and I think that is just
Yeah,
the size of the tournament and expansion. Those are the big headlines that are things generating things,
about
and I think
money.
the difference is how is that money going to get filtered down, and that to me is kind of the bigger overarching point that I know a lot of administrators are a little bit more concerned about, even so than championship access at this point, and look. I think you're right. If you add another couple of games and another couple of round or a round and a half or whatever it might be, to kind of fill things out, sure. I don't think that necessarily changes the massive structure. I think the NCAA tournament right now is working pretty well. If you're throwing a couple of extra teams in, I know this is a concern for a lot of folks. They think, all right, well, this is going to go to those Virginia Techs, those Texas A&Ms, those teams that are Power Five teams on the bubble, and you can understand that thinking. But somebody else pointed out to me as well. If that goes to a regular season champion of some of those mid-major leagues that ends up getting knocked out in their conference tournament, who, let's face it, just because of RPI and everything that goes into it, or their net rating, they probably would not have stood a chance of making the field anyway. If
Yeah.
this now allows them to get in, it can be a good thing for the tournament. So I think there are kind of two sides to the coin. If those teams are the ones that are actually being seeded by the committee and getting put into it, I think there's going to be a lot going on surrounding the NCAA tournament moving forward. You're going to have a lot of talking points. I think at the end of the day, we just got to kind of see the actual final proposal that ends up getting voted on, because I think there could be some changes coming to it, and rightfully so, because there's not going to be a whole lot of time to talk about it. But at the end of the day, you're right. I don't think there's going to be just this massive, like, all right, well, this is not the tournament that I grew up on with 64 teams, and we'll eventually get to that point where it's all right. Well, this is the real tournament kind of starting. That 64 team bracket that everybody gets excited over. But I think it'll still be the same crazy upsets. Still have the Cinderella runs that we're used to seeing. Does it tilt the field a little bit towards the Power Fives? Of course it does. But you know what? That's life now in college athletics.
I do not have the reservoir of indignation to get super mad online about this. You did actually touch on something else that I think is really important for the non-men's basketball stuff about RPI and about how not just how the money is distributed, but how you're picking who gets in. So I wrote earlier this week on Extra Points. This is one of the free newsletters. So I encourage you to read it if you haven't, where I asked people about what they think about expanding the baseball tournament, which is 64 teams. And baseball is a unique sport in that, unlike basketball, the team on the bubble, like one who barely makes the tournament, they can win the whole thing. Ole Miss
As we saw today,
literally just did that. But I mean, even before then, like Coastal Carolina, I don't think was like a 2 seed when they won the tournament. Fresno State was like one of the last teams in the tournament back in 2009, I think, or thereabouts, and they won the whole damn thing. Baseball is, I think, like hockey, where if you have pitchers who are playing out of their skulls, or in hockey, if you have one really hot goalie, it's not just you can score a couple of upsets, you can win the tournament, right? And so you could, I think, much more credibly argue in baseball, there are championship caliber teams that are not part of this event. I don't think you can say that in men's basketball. Like, yeah, one of the play-in teams, like one of those bubble teams, they might make the Sweet 16, but I don't think anyone's thinking like that Virginia Tech team that wins 7-9 in ACC play is going to win the actual tournament. They might win a game, they might win 2 games, might win 3 games. They're not going to win the thing, right? And what I was hearing from the baseball community, I talked to some coaches, talked to some ADs, talked to a few commissioners, was pretty significantly, we're not against expanding the baseball tournament in principle. We'd have to look at the logistics of how to do it. We'd have to look at what that means for schedules and venue availability. But we're more concerned about how. Basketball has the net, which is like the RPI but repurposed, and hockey has pairwise ratings, which is I think a much more explicit, like a structured way of picking teams. Baseball's still using the RPI, and as you probably remember, Brian, and maybe some of our listeners do too. Most people hate the RPI, and then like during the year, schools were gaming it so shamelessly that they'd cancel midweek games, even when the weather was perfectly fine. Just like, you would be bad for the computers. And so what I was hearing more was like, do I want to, if we go from 64 to 68 and we keep the same system for picking teams, which is pretty transparently baloney, I would vote against it. Not because just because out of principle, I don't want to do something that doesn't benefit my kind of schools or, hurt student outcomes in this way. I don't want to make a tweak just so the SEC can get 19 teams in the baseball tournament every single year. So we'll see if there's some momentum to shift that. I have heard similar complaints from volleyball SWAs and from some coaches about like, hey, this RPI system makes it impossible for us to affordably schedule games. It's not a great predictor of who's actually good. Let's do something different. Yo no sé. Those are the kind of, I mean, like if we can just hire Ken Palm to make a better efficiency statistic for every sport, I think that would be a good use of NCAA money. But that's just my opinion.
Well, I'm pretty sure Ken Palm is included on the team sheet that the selection committee is using nowadays, along with the net ratings and things that have been made to
literally. Yeah.
But I mean, basketball, you have so many different metrics. I mean, you can look up some of the synergy stuff and all the things that go into basketball nowadays in terms of the analytics and stats. It's much more advanced. Baseball is not even close to where that is, and that's kind of where that gaming of the RPI kind of came up. I know we've discussed, I believe, on a previous show here on Going for Two. So, it's just unique to each individual sport. And I think you also got to keep in mind that as we talk about all of this and we talk about these things coming out of the transformation committee, there are some mundane NCAA rules that govern some of these things like field size that, that frankly are kind of all one size fits all. And that kind of needs to be adjusted so that, the volleyball tournament can expand. And maybe the basketball one doesn't expand as much as we kind of thought. But, this other sport kind of needs that kind of baseline rule in there. So there are some of those minor things as well from I guess even a compliance issue that you kind of say, all right, well, we kind of need a little extra here. And so some of that I think is also kind of being included in these type of discussions as well.
It's funny that baseball doesn't have as elaborate or prescriptive of an advanced stats tool in college baseball, given that like no sport has more analytics community period than baseball, right? Like it's a little bit harder for soccer, or it's been a little bit harder for hockey where the supporting infrastructure hasn't caught up. We can do play charting for football and for basketball, it's not so bad. You would think we could do something better for baseball. I suspect it's more of no one's just done it yet because it hasn't been someone's priority. So I invite you, the listener, to fix this problem for us or to fix college athletics. We're going to follow this, I think, more over the coming couple of weeks. Obviously, the college basketball tournaments are going to be the biggest story in this world. But what happens with soccer? I've heard that there's been some conversation about changing how teams are seeded.
That's already even happening. This upcoming set of tournaments for the Soccers, they're basically changing kind of half of the bracket in terms of how things are seeded. So like there are some changes already kind of going on, but I think everybody expects coming out of the transformation committee, this is going to lead to even those even bigger overarching themes at the various sport levels.
If you know anything, you should leak it to us. My email is matt@extrapointsmb.com. I have Signal. I would read my cell phone number over the air here, but you guys are a bunch of weirdos. But if you want it, it's not hard to get. Like people do find it. I would love to know, dear listener, what you think about this process. I promise you there's nothing too inside baseball or nerdy for us. That is literally what we do. Speaking of excelling at your lane and knowing exactly what it is that you do and what you offer the world, let me quickly talk about our good friends at Home Field Apparel. They make comfortable, unique, conversation starter, collegiate licensed apparel. I am wearing a West Virginia hoodie. It is now garbage weather here in Chicago, which means that this is now part of my uniform. We have moved away from the t-shirt and gym shorts uniform. We are now shifting to the hoodie uniform, and then eventually later the hoodie and the Carhartt jacket once things get really gnarly. But I have a bunch of these because they're extremely comfortable. And, it's got a great little vintage logo, right? Is that the blaster, the Colorado School of Mines Dynamite Mule? Maybe my single favorite shirt in the entire collection, because I would never think about the Colorado School of Mines ever if it wasn't for the fact that I've been made aware of this. I mean,
there is a connection between Colorado School of Mines and West Virginia. If you can
walk me through it. Besides expertise and blowing things up.
Well, if you remember back in the day when West Virginia was hanging 70 on Clemson, one of the great things that they used to affect was a play from the Colorado School of Mines. So
was that Bob Stitt?
Stitt happens. Oh yeah.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Where is Bob Stitt these days?
I believe he is an analyst. He's jumped around at a couple places. I'm not sure where this year he is at, but I'll have to look it up. I'll have to
I
figure that out. But I know he's been an analyst at a couple Power Five schools recently, the last couple of years.
I lost track of him after he left Montana. Bob Stitt, if you're listening, the email is matt@extrapointsmb.com. Sure, I just love to talk in general. But even if you're not Bob Stitt or somebody that used to be employed at the Colorado School of Mines or whose handiwork helped absolutely embarrass Clemson on national television, which I don't know, I enjoyed watching. That was a fun game. All of you can buy stuff at Home Field Apparel and get comfortable t-shirts, hoodies, sweatpants. I wouldn't say the stickers are comfortable necessarily, but they do a great job of sticking to stuff, which is what you want out of stickers. You can find all of that at homefieldapparel.com. Use promo code Extra Points to save 15% off of your first order to help keep this show going and keep us clothed in Home Field Apparel stuff. That's kind of the big thing. Brian, I understand that you have been beyond just talking to me and beyond Fox and all the gajillion Collegiate Sports Connect stuff. You had a very interesting guest on Head Coach U that I think you wanted to be able to share some of that on this show here, right?
Yeah, we actually had a chance to stop by and chat with Dave Clawson on this week's episode. We got a very special one coming next week. I won't say who it is, but it is a very important topic, very special topic. And so I think for anybody out there that is enjoying kind of what we're doing here on Going for Two, I think you will like Head Coach U. It's we got a lot of pretty excellent head coaches booked as guests. Going to take that show to the next level. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you get this here podcast, and hopefully everybody's listening in because it's great information, not just about things like how you run the slow mesh or anything like that, or how that kind of came about there at Wake Forest, but also like what's your bye week structure like? How do you work with your athletes? How do you work with your staff? I think a lot of the administrators, certainly that I've gotten messages from have really enjoyed those parts to where they're kind of getting into the mind of some of these head coaches, and certainly Bronco himself, has a very unique approach and philosophy towards college football that he gets to share with guests, and Dave Clawson was certainly one of them.
I love that because I feel like we have know enough ADs and enough SWAs and enough people on the television side and the other kind of college football and college sports industrial complex where we could have some of those conversations. We would know what to ask. But like I know for me, I am not the quote unquote ball knower. And there are other people that are more equipped to have that kind of conversation. I could not sit here and properly explain how a playbook deploy works or how you manage a staff or how you could talk about meaningful academic achievement within a football team or discuss various philosophies. But I love getting into the weeds about that, especially because I'm a regular consumer of football. I would be interested in hearing a volleyball coach do this too. That's what makes this particular program great. I think that fills a niche that people interested in this show would be interested in that they can't get from us specifically. So why don't we real quick, let's go, let's stop listening to me. Let's bring in Dave Clawson and hear what he had to say.
Thrilled to be welcomed, as always, by former Virginia and BYU coach Bronco Mendenhall. And Bronco, we have another guest this week, somebody really special that you know well, Dave Clawson, the head coach at Wake Forest. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me on, Brian and Bronco. And I've listened to every one of them, and I really enjoy it. And I think you guys are doing a great job. And I'm sure for everybody in the coaching industry has benefited from this.
One of the things, check is in the mail for that.
Yeah, one of the things, Brian, that I don't know is the way this works for those that are listening is I kind of choose who comes on, and when someone's impacted my life along the way, either as a coach or a professional or as a human being, right, that I think can add value to this profession that needs leadership at probably now more than ever, and young people need leadership now more than ever. That's how you qualify. And so Dave and I got to know each other when I first came to the CC. And what's so impactful is the place that Dave coaches at Wake Forest is very unique and specific. And sometimes, right, that the outside world thinks that excludes you from being able to have really strong success football-wise. And I just don't believe that. And I know Dave doesn't either. And then eventually you find the right scheme, the right strategy, the right leadership, the right people. You get the right fit and things start to come to fruition that in spite of, or maybe the weaknesses perceived at a school become strengths with the right coach and the right leader. And that's what I think Dave has done. And so I just thought there'd be so many lessons that others could learn from having Dave on, not only as a leader and a coach, but as a person. And so that's how you get qualified to be on. So we're so good to have you, Dave.
Well, I'm honored, Bronco, and you know the respect that I have for you. And I don't know if I would have got through the COVID season without you. You know, those Monday and Tuesday talks of what we were doing and the purpose of it. Those are very challenging times. And I don't know if I could have got through that 2020 season without some of the advice and counsel that you were giving me. So I feel the same way.
Well, I want to touch upon that here in just a little bit, but before we do, Dave, you just came off a big win against Army, and Bronco, I know you guys ended up playing quite a few of those triple option teams when you were back at your BYU days. You played Air Force quite a bit in the Mountain West. Now, I'm curious, from your standpoint, what's more difficult to prepare for? Is it that triple option teams, especially maybe on a short week, or is it Dave's slow mesh that you got to worry about as a defensive guy?
Man, that's a tough question. So the triple option, because that is so distinct and different, and the teams that do it well, it takes you to a whole other place. And quite frankly, the best part of playing a triple option team, which was my favorite, by the way, regardless of outcome, because of the fundamentals and the challenge and just rethinking like all what you know about football and does it fit when you play a team like that. So just when we kind of became option defense experts and kind of got that dialed in, then we took a shellacking playing Navy one year at Virginia as I was trying to help those kids kind of learn how to defend the option, right? Which was sometimes you have to go through it before you try it. And then we played Dave my first year, maybe the first shoot, right at the beginning of my career at Virginia. And the slow mesh was slow and not meshing as well. But Dave's team won. And then the next time we played, it was, it's slow and it's meshing pretty dang well. And then the next time it was this thing, whatever this is formidable. And so it's been fun for Dave to see the vision that he had, and then the continuity and the stick-to-itiveness. Because a lot of times, people abandon things when it's not just perfect. And the stick-to-itiveness with the foresight of what it could become and the advantage that could lend. And man, you add a couple receivers on the outside of that when you're meshing and slowing and running and having to deal with that. And then the RPO-ish action, and you just end up with one-on-ones. And that's a tough deal. And so anyway, the foresight for all that, I'm not sure which is harder, but they're both really hard. And that's a credit to the designer.
Dave, I'll flip that question around for you. Playing that triple option, you know that you're going to have some limited possessions there just because of the clock that they're going to soak up. Does that put any additional pressure on you and your staff in terms of, hey, we got to score at some time? Is there that feeling that, hey, we got to do a little bit more every time we have the football?
Absolutely. And I think whenever you play a triple option team, whether it be Army, Navy, one of the academies, there's so much emphasis put on the defense of defending a different style of attack and playing, the cut blocks and the different formations and all the different motions they run. But it's a team game, and the offense is part of that. Is you're not going to get a lot of possessions, and you better score when you get the football. And so you go into that game saying, for every 3 times you get the ball, you better score at least twice, because if you ever allow those teams to get ahead of you, it becomes a really long day. And yet if you can jump out to a lead and make them play from behind, then at times they're forced to do things they're not as comfortable doing. So, it's not just about how are you going to defend it, but the offense plays a huge role in that. And, a year ago, we played Army up at West Point, and we won 70-56. And,
wow.
I don't know, this year, we had a little different scheme. But I think the biggest part of it is getting your players to embrace the challenge of defending the triple option. There's so much of it of, D linemen, they don't want to be cut block. And, it requires a level of discipline and focus that's unique in terms of defense when you play that style. And I just think that the best job that our defensive staff did this year was just getting them to embrace the challenge of what it would take to win a game like that. And then our offensive staff did a great job of coming up with a plan and getting the players to understand the value of every play and the value of every rep and not falling behind the chains. Because against Army, a 1st and 10 that becomes a 2nd and 15 becomes a 3rd and 12. And now you're giving up a possession and you might only get 8 of them. So you can't waste the play.
To back up Dave's point, I remember, and I used to circle it, and when the season or when our schedule would come out at BYU, I would go right to the Air Force game, and I would start promoting that game to our players the minute it came off the presses. And that became literally one of the most exciting and formidable games that they look forward to. But that comes from the leader, right? And presenting it as a huge opportunity rather than, oh, we have to go do this and play. And so really just how it's presented, back to what Dave was saying, is such a huge point. And man, when you play well against one of those teams, there's a sense of accomplishment that is well earned. And that's a huge marker for a program.
And the big difference was a year ago, we won that game 70-56. And I think only half of our football team felt like they played in a winning football game. And what was so rewarding this year is our whole football team felt like they played in a winning football game.
I'm deeply appreciative that we are able to have this kind of stuff to be able to kind of clip in here and add to our whole package. I think it's a really valuable podcast to add to your audio diet, because it's something that I don't think really exists in the college football-ish ecosystem right now as far as podcasts are concerned. We got another exciting week coming up. We've got some cool interviews, not just on Head Coach U, but across Connect and some of the work here that we're doing. I have a story that I hope to be able to share next week about mascots that is deeply extra points that I can't wait to share, right? We want to get that juxtaposition of serious, professional, and very stupid. And I think that some of the things we're tracking here will fall into that. And you can find what we're doing on Collegiate Sports Connect on extrapointsmb.com. I would just very quickly ask, if you like the show, do us a favor, tell other people you like the show. Whether that is with giving us fancy reviews on those algorithms as we try to appease those overlords, or hey, drop a link in the Reddit, tweet a link, tell your coworkers, tell the other your colleagues here in the industry, hey, these guys are doing something different that's not so bad. You should add that here. Not so bad, right? The very, very Midwestern high praise. That helps a lot, because word of mouth is how almost all of our ecosystem has grown. And that makes it easier for us to go to our boss and say, hey, stop making us do other stuff. We got to keep making Going for Two, or we got to go do other stuff here for Going for Two. We can make a better show with your support. Brian, anything else real quick that you want to plug before I let these fine people go and enjoy their weekend?
Well, no, hopefully if you enjoyed that little clip there of Head Coach U, you'll subscribe. We got a great episode coming your way on Monday. That is in a separate feed. We're going to kind of back away from these now that you've gotten a little sampler platter of Head Coach U, both the Chris Peterson episode last week and Dave Clawson this week. We got another head coaches lined up. So I think if you want to subscribe to more of that, be sure to jump into that feed. And as always, the D1 ticker is the place for both of our work. It always shows up there. It's basically your favorite ADs, favorite morning email, and favorite email to read before they kind of go home in the afternoon as well. So a lot of the stuff going there. We got some big things happening. A crazy weekend in college football coming up. I'm sure we'll end up discussing a little bit of that on next week's show as well. But I'm definitely staying busy, and I think everybody else out there is too. And so I'm excited to bring it all here, bring it all back and tie it off into a bow here on Going for Two.
It'll be fun. So go watch some football. Maybe go pick some apples or something on Sunday. We'll be back and help you digest everything when we come back here next week. Thanks for listening. We'll catch up with y'all soon.